There is something unusual about overnight trains. They move through the world while most of it sleeps, carrying quiet passengers toward places that do not yet exist in their lives. Some people board those trains with clear plans. Others board them simply because they need to leave something behind. But every so often, two strangers step onto the same train without knowing that the journey ahead will quietly alter the direction of their lives. This is the account of one such night. A single train ride, two passengers, and a conversation that lasted until morning. Before we continue with this night story, we want to say thank you. Smart Love Tales continues to grow because of you. Every person who listens to this story, every likes, every comment, it's truly mean a lot to us. Even if you have been here for a while, or this is your first time listening, thank you for being here tonight. It departed at 11:47 p.m. Not the busiest train, not the fastest, just a long silver line of quiet carriages waiting beneath dim station lights. By the time the conductor called the final boarding announcement, the platform had grown calm. Footsteps echoed. Suitcases rolled across concrete. A few passengers climbed aboard one by one. Among them was a man named Adrian. He carried a single bag, nothing heavy, nothing that suggested a long journey. He moved through the carriage slowly, scanning seat numbers until he found his place beside a window. Outside, the platform lights flickered against the glass. Inside the train, the air held that familiar stillness of late travel, where strangers share space but rarely share words. Adrian sat down and looked out into the darkness beyond the station. Then, the train began to move. The seat across from Adrian remained empty for several minutes. Then, just before the train left the final platform light behind, someone arrived. A woman. She carried a small leather bag and a folded coat. Her movements were quiet, careful, almost thoughtful. She checked the seat number, then sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The train picked up speed. Metal wheels hummed along the tracks. Outside the window, the station lights slowly faded into darkness. The woman glanced out toward the passing landscape, then toward Adrian, and offered a polite nod. He returned the gesture. No words, just the quiet acknowledgement of two travelers sharing the same space for the night. Night trains have their own rhythm, the gentle rocking of the carriage, the distant sound of wheels crossing track joints, the occasional glow of a passing town outside the window. Passengers settle into silence. Some read, some sleep, some stare into the darkness as if searching for something beyond the glass. Adrian belonged to the last group. He watched the window carefully, not because there was much to see, but because the darkness outside felt oddly comforting. Across from him, the woman removed a book from her bag. She read quietly beneath the soft overhead light. For nearly an hour, the two of them existed in complete silence. Then something changed. The train slowed slightly as it approached a small rural station. Outside the window, a handful of lights appeared, a cluster of houses, a quiet platform. Adrian spoke for the first time. He asked the simple question, "Is that book good?" The woman looked up. For a moment, she seemed surprised. Then she smiled and closed the book gently. "It depends," she said, "on what kind of night you're having." That answer lingered in the air longer than expected, because it wasn't just an answer, it was an invitation. Conversation on overnight trains begins carefully. A few polite questions. Where are you traveling to? Work or vacation? How long is the journey? But something about that night felt different. The conversation moved quickly beyond the usual topics. They spoke about places they had lived, cities they had left, dreams that had once felt close and somehow drifted further away over time. Adrian learned that her name was Elena. She had boarded the train only 2 stations before his, and like him, she was traveling toward a place that felt uncertain. Not frightening, just unknown. And perhaps that was why the conversation continued so easily, because sometimes it is easier to speak honestly to a stranger than to someone who already knows your story. Midnight passed, then 1 in the morning. Most passengers in the carriage had fallen asleep. The lights dimmed slightly. The train continued forward through empty landscapes and sleeping towns. But Adrian and Elena remained awake, talking, sometimes about serious things, sometimes about small memories, a childhood home, a favorite cafe, a city street that once felt important. Outside the window, the world slipped past in darkness. Fields, rivers, occasional lights in distant farmhouses, each mile carrying them closer to morning. At some point during the early hours, Elena asked a question, not about work, not about travel, something simpler. She said, "If you could start over tomorrow, what would you do differently?" The question rested between them. Adrian looked out the window again. The reflection of the carriage lights moved across the glass. Then he answered. He said he would take more chances, speak more honestly, stop waiting for the perfect moment to begin something new. Elena listened carefully. Then she nodded, because, as she explained, that was exactly why she was on the train. Elena had spent many years living in the same city, working the same job, walking the same streets. Nothing about that life was wrong, but slowly the feeling grew that she had paused her own story somewhere along the way. And so one evening she made a quiet decision. She bought a ticket, packed a small bag, and boarded the night train toward a new city where no one knew her yet. Not because she had everything planned, but because she believed something important waited on the other side of uncertainty. Adrian listened without interruption, because in many ways, her story sounded strangely familiar. Around 5 in the morning, the darkness outside began to soften. The horizon turned faint shades of blue and silver. Passengers slowly stirred from sleep. The train moved across a long bridge over calm water. Dawn was approaching, and Adrian and Elena noticed it at the same moment. They both turned toward the window. For several minutes they said nothing, just watched the light return to the world. There was something peaceful about that moment. 2 travelers, a nearly empty train, and a sunrise waiting ahead. The train arrived shortly after sunrise. The platform looked entirely different from the one they had left the night before. Morning commuters filled the station. Coffee stands opened. Announcements echoed through the hall. Adrian stood and lifted his bag from the rack above the seat. Elena did the same. For a moment they hesitated, because overnight conversations create a strange kind of connection, one built entirely from shared time and honest words spoken between strangers. Then Elena smiled. "Good luck tomorrow," she said. Adrian nodded. "You too." And with that, they stepped off the train into the morning crowd. No one at the station noticed them. To everyone else, they were simply 2 passengers arriving on an early train. But sometimes the most important journeys happen quietly, without witnesses, without announcements, just 2 people meeting somewhere between yesterday and tomorrow, long enough to remind each other that new beginnings are always possible. And somewhere far behind them, the night train continued its route down the tracks, carrying the next group of travelers toward whatever tomorrow might bring.